Today we are going to look at a super easy technique to make really effective visuals from SketchUp to Photoshop. You don't have to use Photoshop, you could easily use Procreate. The techniques that I'm going to show you are the same, as are the layer types and so on. So I've just got a sample file here. It's a pretty simple model. I've got some scenes set up. I won't talk about scenes in this video, but if you're going to use this technique, they are vital. You need to make sure that you have not nudged your view like this between taking different exports. So scenes just allow you to lock in that viewpoint. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm making sure that I have got no edges on in this view. So there's two ways of doing that. You either go to the view menu and you go edge style, you make sure that edges are deselected and make sure that profiles are deselected, or you can go to styles and use these boxes on your styles palette down here. If I click the first one, that's the one for edges. The second one is a face style. This one is your background and your sky. I've slightly tweaked the sky to make it a bit bluer, and then you can add watermarks and change other selection colors and so on, but we're not going to be looking at that. Just thought I'd run through what they are as well. So I've got no lines on, this is just my colour, and I am going to go to File and Export and 2D Graphic. And actually I will put it into something called Images. So I'm just going to call this layer Colour. And it's a JPEG. I'll just go to my options and I'll put it as a 4000 pixel file size. Normally when I do mine, I do them at 8000 odd because it means that people can print them out at a very high resolution, or I can print them out. But for the sake of speed, I'm just going to put it, I've already got that in there. I'll just replace that one from a course that I taught the other day. So the more you've got in here, the longer this will take. My computer is reasonably quick, but some of the plants are a bit more complex. So that's that done. Great. So the next thing I want to do is to do an export with the shadows, but only the shadows and no color. So what I'm going to do is I am going to put my shadows, make sure that they're at a good time of day. But what I want to do first is I want to make sure that everything else is black and white, or as black and white as it can be. We can see that there's sometimes some issues with plants and different kinds of trees cause a bit of oddness. I think it's just how the graphics are done. And I'm going to go and turn that sky off. So everything now is black and white. And when I put those shadows on, again, this will take a while, again, because of the complexity of plants, and the way that I have done my plants is cut around them so that you can have shadows. You'll probably have noticed that sometimes you get a box for shadows, and that is because you need to manually cut round the plants. Great, so there are my shadows. They look pretty good. If I move these sliders, I could make the shadows bigger or smaller depending on the time of day. I won't bother to do that because it can be a bit laggy, especially when you've got all the plants on. But I'm going to go to File and Export 2D Graphic, and I'll just call this one Shadows and press Export. Again, that will chug along, hopefully not for too long. Don't have to fill a video up with me waffling. You can see it's this plant in particular is quite problematic. Should probably not have put that in there really, but 3D plants and shadows are always going to take longer, or very, very complex plants with lots of lines and edges and so on. I've also got three-dimensional climbers on all of the fences. So yeah, really not very wise choice in terms of my planting for this example. Brilliant, that's that done. So I'm going to turn the shadows off immediately. They do make everything much slower. So yeah, if you notice your model lagging, make sure that the shadows are off. Now I want a sketchy edges style. So I've gone to styles and select. If you're not seeing this styles palette, it's under the Windows menu. So we have got Windows and styles, and make sure that is ticked. So I am going to go to select, and let's see, I might go, sketchy edges is always the obvious place. Maybe a pencil one. We'll just go pencil. Brilliant. So that has now shown me the edges. I can edit this slightly. I can fiddle around with how much detail is shown. Just bump my tags up. I can also make that pencil a darker grey. I want it black, but I'll make it a slightly darker grey. There are lots of other styles. Style Builder Competition Winners also has quite a nice pencil. If I go rough pencil style, this one is also, I quite like it. So yeah, maybe we'll just stick with that. And then I'm going to go to File and Export and 2D Graphic. and I'm going to call it lines. Replace that example from the other day. So the lines can take the longest. Sometimes I turn my plants off, and I probably should have done that. None of my plants really have edges. Generally, your plants, you don't want them to have edges. It will almost always look a complete mess if your plants have edges. So now I've got these 3 files, and I'm going to go into Photoshop, and I want to go to Files and Scripts and load files into Stack. All this does is just puts these 3 images into the same file for me and stacks them on top of each other. So we've got shadow, and I'm holding down Command or Control, and I can select multiple images. I put them all in here. We are about to find out. Brilliant, that's 1, that's 2, and there's the edges, fab. Okay, I had a slight panic that they weren't showing up as coming from today. So obviously I can now drag these up and down. So I've dragged the colour down to the bottom. The shadow is on top of it, and the lines is on top of that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I will fiddle around with the shadows slightly. So if I put the opacity down, that's going to allow me to see where there are shadows and see the image underneath. So there's something going on down here which I don't really want. I'm going to get a brush, and I'm going to make that brush white, and I'm just going to draw over it in white. So that will now eliminate that shadow there. These shadows here, they're slightly looking a bit odd. I suspect that's just the way that the planters were made, and I think I'm just going to soften the edge of it. So this just fiddling around with very, very small details. You can also add in shadows. So if you've got, for some reason, shadows not showing where you wanted them, you know, where you've got some planting with square shadows and you want to delete those shadows and bring in your own shadows, you can do that here. But the rest of it, that looks great. So, okay, I'll put that back up. And now what I'm going to do is put this on a multiply layer. So what multiply does is it takes out the white. So if I toggle that on and off, now you can see the shadows. One great thing about exporting the shadows separately is that you can control how dark they are. So, you know, if I bring that layer opacity down to 75%, they're just a bit less dark. You may at this point also want to fiddle around with your colour layer. You could lighten it, or I'm going to just duplicate this. You could apply an artistic filter to it. You could use an external application to do that. I will just go to Filter Gallery, and maybe we'll put Sponge on. Sponge will soften it a little bit, like so, and I think I'm going to put a white layer on. I find this is quite an effective way to soften things back, but put it at like 10%, and I'm also going to change the opacity on that layer that I just sponged so that I get a little bit more detail. So that's it's you know, I've kind of knocked it back slightly in a very, very, very simplistic way. So last thing I want to do is fiddle around with my lines layer. So I am going to bring the opacity down on that, just turn the sponge layer off, and I will get my white brush again, and I need to remove the layers where the lines where there are plants. So I can see here that there are actually plants. You wouldn't see all of these in reality. Now actually I'm going to slightly go and change my brush to a soft round brush. I think that's always a nice way of doing it. So some of the fence we're going to see, some of it probably not. This tree looks a bit odd. I'll just get rid of these. To increase and decrease the size of your brush, I'm holding down the Control and Option keys together. So I hold them both down, and then I click and drag my mouse left and right, and that changes the size of the brush. It's the easiest way to do it. It saves you having to go over to the top and faff about with it. So I'm just going to do this super quickly. Of that bit, get rid of these bits up here. Great, there's something going on. Oh no, those are the stepping stones. That can stay where it is, and then just that bit there. So I shall put the opacity of this back up again, and I'm going to duplicate this The top one I am going to put on a multiply layer. Well, a multiply mode, I should say that. This bottom one, now all I'm going to do is I am going to get the eraser tool up, and I'm going to choose the soft brush again, which is already here, and I'm going to make that brush size nice and big, and I'm going to change the opacity to about between 20 and 30%. And I'm just going to start erasing this line, this layer through. Can see there's a bit more I could have got rid of from that lines layer, and so I can start building up color this way. So it's a really quick and easy way to effectively soften down your visuals, but also just draw attention. You know, the more I'm clicking, the more I'm erasing, the more I'm drawing attention to that area. So, you know, the table, these two pots, probably the bench, the stuff behind I'm less bothered about. The additional lines layer, what that means is because I've erased this lines layer, the one that I left as a regular black and white layer, the additional multiply layer just brings those lines back in again. So there's all kinds of stuff. This is the basic technique for a huge range of things that you can do. You know, how you give that background image a treatment is going to really change the look. The line style you use, you could then bring in other elements. You could bring in your own line work with a pen in Procreate or a tablet in Photoshop. You know, you don't have to use a soft brush like this. You could use a wet marker brush, or you could use a colored pencil brush. So it's a really powerful technique. It was taught to me at college in 2011 by an excellent SketchUp teacher, Max, who was brilliant and taught me all kinds of stuff because I was super keen bean and wanted to learn everything. So yeah, give this a try. It's really quick. That's the main thing. It's a quick and it's simple and really easy way to soften back your visuals. If you've got any questions, then leave a comment below.